It was another long evening at the city's most luxurious hotel, a place filled with gold lights, crystal chandeliers, and the sound of laughter from people who never had to worry about money. The air smelled of perfume and expensive food, and soft music floated through the grand hall. Among the waiters and waitresses rushing quietly between tables, one young woman worked carefully, her eyes calm and focused. Her name was Lena. She moved like someone used to silence, her steps light, her voice gentle. To most guests, she was invisible, just another uniform serving drinks and smiles. But behind her quiet face was a world she had left behind, a dream buried under years of responsibility. Lena had once lived for music. Since childhood, she had loved the piano. Her father had an old upright piano in their small apartment, and every evening after work he would sit beside her while she practiced. The sound of the keys filled their home with warmth and hope. She used to imagine playing on a big stage, her name shining in lights, people clapping and smiling as she bowed. She dreamed of studying at the city's music conservatory, and for a short time it seemed possible. Her teachers believed in her. They said her touch on the keys had something rare, something that came not from skill but from feeling. But life changed suddenly. When her father became sick, everything else stopped mattering. Hospital bills piled up and her mother's small income wasn't enough. Lena quit her studies and took the first job she could find, serving tables at the luxury hotel. It was supposed to be temporary, but years passed. The piano at home went quiet. Dust gathered on the keys and her fingers lost their daily rhythm. The dream faded into something painful to think about. Still, every time she passed the grand piano in the hotel lobby, something inside her ached. She always slowed her step for a second, her eyes drawn to it before reminding herself that her world was no longer one of music. That evening, she was tired. Her shift had started early and would end long after midnight. The hotel was hosting a private party for some of the richest people in town. Investors, business owners, and celebrities. They filled the ballroom with loud laughter and expensive conversations. The waitstaff had been told to be extra careful. No mistakes, no delays, and no talking back. The hotel management wanted perfection. Lena kept her smile fixed even when her feet hurt, even when a guest waved her away impatiently or snapped fingers for another drink. She was used to it. She had learned long ago that kindness was not always returned, but it should still be given. The grand piano stood near the center of the ballroom, where a professional musician played gentle classical pieces to set the mood. The notes filled the room like soft air. Lena listened as she worked, trying not to let her thoughts drift too far. Sometimes the melody was so beautiful it hurt. She carried trays, filled glasses, cleared plates, and stayed invisible. That was her job, to serve, to move, and to be forgotten. As the night went on, a tall man entered the room, followed by a small group of guests. He was well known, his face often on business magazines and television. His name was Mr. Harrington, a man who had built his fortune in real estate and technology. People admired his success, but they also whispered about his arrogance. He was the kind of man who enjoyed being in control, who liked to test others just to remind them of their place. When he arrived, the atmosphere changed slightly. The other guests greeted him with laughter that sounded a little too loud, a little too eager. He smiled the way rich men do when they know everyone is watching. Lena noticed the tension when he came in, but she stayed focused on her work. She moved between the tables, serving food and wine, keeping her head down. Mr. Harrington began to tell stories that made people laugh, though the laughter often felt forced. He liked being the center of attention. After some time, the pianist took a short break and stepped away from the instrument to rest his hands. The sound of music stopped, leaving a small silence in the room. Mr. Harrington turned to look at the piano, then at the people around him, and with a smirk he said loudly, "Well, what now? Who will play for us?" No one answered. Then his eyes fell on Lena, who happened to be nearby, setting down a tray of glasses. "You there," he said with a teasing tone. "You look like you've got free hands. Can you play something?" His voice carried across the room. People turned to look. Some smiled, thinking it was a joke. Lena froze for a second, caught off guard. She smiled politely and said softly, "I don't think I should, sir. I'm just serving tonight." But Mr. Harrington wasn't the kind of man who liked being told no. "Come now," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Surely you can press a few keys. Let's see what our lovely waitress can do." His friends laughed. The sound stung more than words. Lena felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her voice calm. "I used to play a little," she said quietly, hoping that would end it. "Oh, used to," Mr. Harrington repeated loudly, pretending to be impressed. Then it settled. "You can entertain us until the real pianist comes back." The guest clapped playfully, urging her on. The pianist hesitated but nodded politely, stepping aside. Lena looked at him for a second, unsure, but something in her heart told her not to run away. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was that tiny spark of music still alive inside her. She took a slow breath and walked toward the piano. Every step felt heavier than the last. Her hands trembled as she sat down. She hadn't touched an instrument like this in years. The piano keys gleamed under the lights. For a moment, she didn't move. The room waited, filled with curious eyes and faint laughter. She could hear someone whisper, "This should be good." Another voice chuckled, "Hope she doesn't break it." Lena's fingers hovered above the keys. Her heart was racing so fast she could hear it in her ears. But then she closed her eyes. The noise around her faded away. In her mind, she saw her father sitting beside her again, smiling as she practiced late at night. She remembered his words, "Play from your heart, not from your hands." She pressed the first note. It was soft, uncertain, but pure. Then another and another. Slowly, a melody began to form. One she had composed herself years ago but never finished. The laughter stopped. The music started as a whisper and grew stronger. Her fingers found their rhythm again, moving across the keys like they had never forgotten. Each note carried emotion, pain, love, loss, and hope all at once. People began to listen. The sound filled every corner of the hall. Conversation stopped. The waiters paused their work. Even Mr. Harrington leaned forward, his smile fading. There was something powerful in the way Lena played. Not showy or technical, but honest. It felt like she was telling a story without words, a story that everyone understood in their own way. When she reached the middle of the piece, her hands moved faster, her eyes still closed, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The melody turned deeper, like a voice breaking through silence. Some guests looked around, surprised by how moved they felt. A woman near the front wiped her eyes quietly. Lena finished with a final gentle chord that hung in the air for a long moment before fading. The silence that followed was heavy, almost unreal. Then suddenly applause filled the room, loud, sincere, and long. People stood up from their chairs, clapping and cheering. The same guests who had laughed earlier now looked amazed. Even the billionaire who had mocked her was speechless. Lena slowly opened her eyes. For a moment she looked confused, like she had forgotten where she was. Then she saw the crowd standing, smiling, clapping. Her hands shook slightly. She didn't know what to say or do. The pianist who had stepped aside gave her a nod of respect. Mr. Harrington finally stood and clapped, though his face showed more surprise than pride. "Well," he said with a half-smile, "it seems we've been keeping a real artist behind the trays." The guests laughed again, but this time the sound was warm, not cruel. Lena smiled politely, stood up and thanked them softly before stepping away from the piano. As she returned to her work, several guests stopped her to say how beautiful her playing had been. Some asked where she had learned. She only smiled and said, "I just love music." Deep down, her heart was pounding with something she hadn't felt in years: joy, pride, and a strange kind of freedom. Later that night, when the party ended and the lights dimmed, Lena stayed behind to help clean the hall. The piano sat quietly again, shining under the soft light. She touched its edge gently, almost like saying goodbye. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. She had been seen, truly seen, not as a waitress, but as herself. As she walked home through the quiet streets, the sound of her own music echoed in her memory. The city lights reflected in puddles on the road, and the night air felt different, lighter somehow. She thought about her father, about the old piano in their apartment, and about the promise she had made to herself years ago, never to stop believing in music. Maybe, she thought, it wasn't too late to keep that promise. That night before going to bed, she sat at her own dusty piano. The keys were out of tune and the room was small, but she didn't care. She started playing again, softly, carefully, like meeting an old friend. And in that quiet moment, she smiled for real. For the first time in years, the dream didn't feel lost. It was only waiting for her to return. The next evening arrived faster than anyone expected. The hotel was once again filled with light, laughter, and the sound of expensive shoes on marble floors. It was a grand night, the kind that made the city glow from the outside. Rich guests came in shiny cars, smiling for pictures, greeting each other as if the world belonged to them. The staff stood ready, polite and quiet, preparing for another long night of serving drinks, clearing plates, and keeping everything perfect. Lena had been working since morning. She had barely slept after what had happened the night before. The memory of that moment at the piano still played in her mind like a dream. She could still feel the soft weight of the keys beneath her fingers, the silence before the applause, the look of surprise on everyone's faces. It had been both terrifying and beautiful. She didn't tell anyone about it except her mother, who had smiled through tears and said she always knew Lena's music would find its way back someday. But at work, everything looked normal again. No one mentioned it, and she didn't either. She just put on her uniform, tied her hair, and started setting tables like she did every other night. Still, she noticed something different in how a few people looked at her, a kind of quiet curiosity. Some of the waiters whispered about how the guests had cheered for her. One said, "I heard the billionaire himself clapped for her." Another laughed and said, "Yeah, maybe she'll get a raise now." Lena smiled but said nothing. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to do her job. By evening, the ballroom was ready again. Tonight's event was even larger. It was the second night of the charity gala, and it was rumored that more famous people would attend. The tables were covered in white linen, silver cutlery gleamed, and candles flickered softly. A string quartet played gentle music as guests entered. The sound filled the air like silk. Lena carried trays of champagne, moving carefully between tables, keeping her balance while her mind wandered. She had always loved watching people when they didn't know they were being watched. She noticed little details: a woman adjusting her necklace nervously, a man pretending to laugh at a joke, someone checking their phone under the table. People liked to look perfect, but behind the smiles everyone carried something unseen. She wondered if any of them had once given up a dream the way she had. When the last of the guests arrived, the music grew louder and laughter filled the hall. The billionaire, Mr. Harrington, was there again, sitting at the main table. He looked exactly as before, confident, charming, and slightly bored. But Lena noticed that when his eyes met hers across the room, something flickered in his expression. Maybe recognition, maybe curiosity. He raised his glass slightly, a small gesture of acknowledgement. Lena gave a polite nod and continued serving. She didn't know if he remembered what had happened last night or if he even cared. Rich people often treated moments like that as entertainment, nothing more. As the night went on, she worked non-stop, weaving between tables, pouring wine, serving food, and making sure every guest felt important. But deep down, she could feel something different in the air. People were whispering about her again. A few guests pointed quietly, smiling. One of them stopped her and said, "You're the girl who played the piano yesterday, right?" Lena nodded shyly. The woman smiled and said, "That was incredible. I still can't get that melody out of my head." Another guest overheard and joined the conversation. "Yes," he said, "everyone was talking about it today. That performance was something else." Lena thanked them softly and moved on, her heart pounding. She wasn't used to attention. She just wanted to disappear back into her routine, but now it seemed impossible. When she walked past the grand piano again, her eyes rested on it. The same piano she had played the night before stood quietly in the corner. The surface shone under the soft golden light. It looked almost alive, like it was waiting for her. She smiled faintly and whispered under her breath, "Not tonight." But destiny had other plans. As the evening progressed, Mr. Harrington decided to make a toast. He stood up, glass in hand, and the hall quieted. "To talent," he said with a charming smile, "and to the people who surprise us." The guests clapped politely. Then he turned toward Lena, who was standing nearby holding a tray. "And to our very own secret musician," he added. Laughter rippled through the room. Lena froze. She didn't know what to say. Mr. Harrington waved at her to come closer. "Come on," he said in a lighter tone than the night before. "Don't be shy. We all remember last night. I think everyone here would agree it was unforgettable." Some guests clapped again. A few cheered. Lena could feel her face turning red, but this time there was no mockery in the room, only genuine excitement. Mr. Harrington continued, I must admit, when I asked you to play, I expected a joke. But you proved me wrong. So tonight I'd like to ask again, not as a challenge, but as a request. Would you do us the honor of playing another piece? The room filled with murmurs of agreement. Everyone wanted to hear her again. The quartet stopped playing and smiled at her encouragingly. Lena hesitated. She looked down at her tray, then at the piano. Part of her wanted to say no. She was tired, nervous, and afraid of disappointing them. But another part of her, the part that had lived for music, wanted to say yes. She took a deep breath and nodded. "All right," she said softly. The crowd clapped as she walked toward the piano. Her hands felt cold, her heart beat fast. She sat down, the light shining softly on her face. This time, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like the invisible waitress anymore. She felt like herself. She placed her fingers on the keys. The room went silent. Then she began to play. The melody was different tonight. It started slow, gentle, like a whisper. Then it grew stronger, flowing like water, filling the room with warmth and color. The music told a story, but not of sadness this time, but of rediscovery. Each note carried light. Her movements were graceful and natural, like she was speaking through sound instead of words. The guests listened in complete silence. Some leaned forward. Others closed their eyes. The clinking of glasses and murmurs stopped completely. It was as if time had paused. Even the hotel staff stood still at the edges of the room watching. When she finished, the final note lingered in the air before fading softly. For a moment, no one moved. Then came the applause, louder than before, full of energy and admiration. People stood up again, cheering, clapping, smiling. Some shouted her name. Mr. Harrington clapped too, this time without his usual smirk. He looked thoughtful. When the applause finally faded, he walked up to her. "You have something rare," he said quietly. "Something people pay to find and still never do." Lena smiled, unsure what to say. "Thank you, sir," she said simply. He nodded. "You shouldn't be serving drinks here. You should be on a stage." She looked down, embarrassed but happy. "Maybe someday," she replied softly. He studied her for a moment, then said, "I think that someday might come sooner than you think." Before she could ask what he meant, another guest approached, a well-dressed man with a friendly smile. "That was wonderful," he said. "I'm actually organizing a small charity concert next month. We're looking for someone with your talent. Would you consider performing?" Lena's heart skipped. "Me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," he said, smiling. "People need to hear you. You have a gift." She didn't know how to answer. It felt unreal. Just 2 nights ago, she was serving tables, invisible. Now strangers were offering her a chance to play again. Mr. Harrington nodded in agreement. "You should do it," he said. "I'll make sure the hotel sponsors it. Consider it an apology for the way I treated you before." Lena looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "You don't need to." "I want to," he interrupted. "Sometimes we all need to be reminded that talent and worth don't wear uniforms." His words stayed with her for the rest of the night. After the guests left and the hall grew quiet again, Lena sat at the piano one last time. The lights were dim, the tables empty, and only the sound of soft cleaning filled the space. She ran her fingers gently over the keys, feeling their cool smoothness. She didn't play this time. She just sat there smiling to herself, thinking of how much had changed in just 2 days. When she finally stood up to leave, the other staff members looked at her differently. They smiled wider, spoke kinder. One of them said, "You make us proud." Walking home under the quiet city lights, Lena felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Her life was still the same in many ways. She still had bills, worries, and work waiting for her. But something inside her had shifted. For the first time in a long while, she felt like her life was opening again. Like a door she thought was locked forever had quietly swung back open. As she reached home and stepped inside, her mother was waiting. "You played again?" she asked with a smile. Lena nodded and laughed softly. "Yes," she said. "And I think I might play again soon." Her mother hugged her tightly. "I told you," she whispered. "Dreams don't die. They just wait for the right time to return." Lena closed her eyes, holding that moment close. For the first time in years, she didn't feel stuck between the life she had and the one she lost. She felt ready for both. And as she looked out the window at the quiet night sky, she knew this was just the beginning. It had been several days since the night of the second performance, yet the memory of that moment stayed in everyone's mind. The hotel? Staff still talked about it when they had a quiet minute. Some said it was the most beautiful thing they had ever seen happen in that ballroom. Others still could not believe that the quiet waitress they worked beside every day was the same person who had played that music that left everyone silent and emotional. Lena tried to stay humble. She didn't want to make a big deal about it, even though she knew that night had changed something deep inside her. Her life had always been about routines. Waking up early, helping her mother, going to work, and returning home late at night. But now she felt something new every morning. She woke up with energy, a spark that made her heart feel lighter. The piano was back in her life again. It was like an old friend she had lost and finally found. Every evening, after finishing work, she would go home, change into comfortable clothes, and sit at the dusty piano in the corner of their small apartment. The sound wasn't perfect. Some keys were a little out of tune, but that didn't matter. What mattered was how it made her feel alive again. Her mother noticed it too. She often stood in the doorway, smiling as Lena played softly in the quiet night. Sometimes she would whisper, "That music used to fill our home. It feels good to hear it again." Those words always made Lena's eyes water because they reminded her of her father. He had been the one who first taught her how to play. The one who had believed she could do something special with her gift. And now, even though he was gone, it felt as if he was listening again, sitting somewhere unseen, proud and happy at work. Things slowly began to change. Guests who had seen her play would recognize her and stop to say hello. Some asked for a picture. Some even requested that she play again during dinner hours, though she always smiled politely and said it wasn't allowed during regular service. The hotel management, however, had begun to see her differently. The general manager called her into his office one morning. He said, "You've brought a lot of attention to our hotel. People are talking about us because of you. The videos from that night have been shared online and the comments are all positive." Lena was surprised. "Videos?" she asked. He nodded and turned his computer screen toward her. There it was. A short clip someone had recorded during her performance. It showed her sitting at the piano in her uniform, her eyes closed, her fingers moving gracefully across the keys. The sound was clear and emotional. The video had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. People were calling her the waitress pianist. Some said her music gave them chills. Others said it brought them to tears. Lena felt her heart race. She had never imagined something like that would happen. She didn't even know who had filmed it. The manager smiled. "The world works in strange ways. Talent finds its way out, no matter where it hides. We've been getting calls from people who want to know who you are. There's even a local journalist asking for an interview." She hesitated. "An interview? I'm not sure." He waved his hand. "You don't have to decide now. But think about it. This could be the start of something big for you." That night when she got home, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She had never imagined fame. She had only ever wanted to play because it made her feel complete. But now, it seemed like life was giving her another chance. The thought scared her as much as it excited her. She didn't want to disappoint anyone, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what might come next. A few days later, she received a call from the same man who had approached her during the second night of the charity event, the one who said he was organizing a concert. He introduced himself properly this time and explained that the concert was a fundraiser for children's hospitals. It would be a small event compared to the grand gala, but important. He wanted her to play one piece to close the night. Lena hesitated for a long time before answering, but something inside her whispered that this was the next step she needed to take. So she said yes. The next weeks were busy. She worked her shifts as usual during the day and practiced late into the night after coming home. Her fingers were sore at first, but the old strength returned. The more she played, the more she remembered, not just songs, but feelings. She remembered the way her father used to sit beside her and nod along. She remembered the joy of losing, herself completely in sound. Her mother supported her quietly, cooking her favorite meals and reminding her to rest. "You'll do great," she said one evening, as Lena rubbed her tired hands. "You've already been through harder things than this." The day of the concert finally came. It was held in a beautiful hall in the center of the city. When Lena arrived, she couldn't believe she was there. The stage lights, the rows of chairs, the sound of instruments being tuned, it was like stepping into a dream she had once locked away. The other musicians greeted her warmly, curious about her story. Some had seen her video online. They said it inspired them. She waited backstage, her heart beating fast. Through the curtain, she could see the crowd filling the hall. It wasn't as large as the ballroom, but it was full of people who cared about the cause. There were reporters, too, with cameras ready. And among the guests, she spotted Mr. Harrington sitting near the front row. He caught her eye and nodded with a small smile. When her turn came, she walked out slowly, her hands trembling slightly. The lights were bright, and for a second, she felt the old fear return. The fear of failing, of not being good enough. But then she remembered what her father used to say, "Play like no one's judging you, play like you're talking to the world without words." She sat down and took a deep breath. The audience waited quietly. Then, she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost like a whisper. The melody she chose was one she had written for her father long ago, but never finished until now. It was a piece full of memory, sadness, love, and gratitude woven together. As she played, the world outside the music disappeared. Every note was a word she could never say, every chord, a memory she could never forget. The hall was silent, except for the sound of the piano. The melody rose and fell like a wave, sometimes light, sometimes deep. People leaned forward, drawn in. Some closed their eyes. Others watched her face, seeing how every emotion she felt came through her hands. When the last note faded, there was a long pause. Then came the applause, loud, honest, endless. People stood up again, clapping, cheering, whistling. The sound filled her chest and made her eyes tear up. She stood, bowed gently, and smiled through the blur of light and noise. After the concert, several people approached her backstage. The event organizer thanked her warmly, saying her performance had made the night unforgettable. Reporters asked questions, wanting to know her story, how she had gone from being a waitress to standing on that stage. She answered humbly, saying she was just grateful for the chance to play again. Mr. Harrington came to see her as well. "You did beautifully," he said sincerely. "I meant what I said before. You don't belong behind a tray. You belong here." She smiled. "Thank you. It still feels unreal." He nodded thoughtfully. "If you're open to it, I know people who can help you take this further. Recordings, performances, the real thing. You have something rare, and the world is starting to notice." Lena looked down, unsure what to say. She wasn't chasing fame, but she wanted to keep playing. She wanted to share her music with more people, not for attention, but because it felt right. That night, when she got home, she placed her sheet music on the piano and sat quietly for a long time. The city outside was peaceful. Her phone buzzed, with messages from friends, co-workers, and strangers congratulating her. One message stood out. It was from a young girl who wrote, "I saw your video online. I want to learn piano too, but my parents can't afford lessons. When I saw you play, I felt like maybe I shouldn't give up." Reading those words made Lena cry softly. For years, she had felt invisible. Now her music was helping others feel seen. As the night grew deeper, she began to play again, softly, just for herself. The music drifted out the window into the quiet street. Somewhere in the city, maybe someone walking home heard it and smiled without knowing where it came from. Lena's journey was just beginning, but she had already learned the most important thing. No matter how far life takes you away from your dreams, if those dreams are real, they will always find a way back. And as her fingers danced lightly over the keys, she felt it again. That sense of peace that only music could give. The same piano that had once been silent was now alive again, just like her spirit. The waitress who once served others joy was now creating her own, and this time she knew she would never let it fade away again. Lena sat in front of the piano, Her hands were trembling and she could feel her heartbeat in her throat. The laughter of the guests still echoed in her ears, but she tried not to look at anyone. She took a slow breath and let her fingers rest gently on the smooth keys. For a moment she just sat there trying to steady herself. It had been years since she last played, years since her hands danced freely across the piano like they once did. The noise in the room faded as everyone waited. Some smiled, expecting her to fumble. Others watched with curiosity, wondering if she would even dare to press a note. The light above the grand piano shone softly, reflecting on the black surface. Lena's eyes focused on her reflection in the polished wood. She looked small, nervous, and completely out of place in her plain uniform, but somewhere deep inside her she felt something stir. A tiny spark of the person she once was, the little girl who had fallen in love with music, who believed she could touch hearts through melodies. She swallowed hard, closed her eyes, and pressed the first key. The sound was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried through the silence. Then another note followed and another. The beginning was fragile, uncertain, like a whisper after years of silence. But then her fingers started remembering. The rhythm came back slowly, as if her body knew what her mind had forgotten. The room that moments ago was filled with laughter was now completely quiet. The guests watched, some leaning forward, trying to understand what was happening. Her melody started to grow. It was gentle but full of emotion, like a story being told without words. Her touch on the keys became more confident, her posture straighter, her breathing steady. The song was not one she had planned. It came from her heart. Every note carried a piece of her life, her dreams, her pain, her hope. It was like she was talking through the piano, saying everything she had never dared to say aloud. The music flowed through the air, filling every corner of the ballroom. The waiters stopped moving. The guests stopped whispering. Even the billionaire who had mocked her sat frozen, his smug smile slowly disappearing. The music rose higher, filling the room with warmth and emotion. Some guests felt a lump in their throat without knowing why. Others closed their eyes and just listened. It was as if time had stopped. Lena was no longer the waitress. She was the artist she was meant to be, lost in the beauty of her own music. The sound carried her away. Her hands moved faster, lighter, freer. She played not to impress but to feel alive again. Each chord was strong, full of emotion. Each pause held a story. She could almost see her father smiling in her memory, sitting beside the old piano they once had at home. She could almost hear his voice telling her to never give up on her dream. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't stop. The emotions poured through her fingertips. Every second became more powerful, and the guests could feel it. One woman near the front pressed a napkin to her eyes. Another guest whispered softly, "She's incredible," but no one clapped yet. They were too caught up in the moment, afraid that any sound would break the magic. When the final part of the piece came, Lena slowed down. The notes softened, turning into something tender and heartbreaking. It was like saying goodbye to something precious. The last few chords echoed in the air, fading slowly, beautifully, until there was nothing left but silence. Lena's hand stayed on the keys for a moment. Her head was slightly bowed and her shoulders rose and fell as she breathed. She didn't dare look up. The room was completely silent. She thought maybe they hated it. Maybe they were just too polite to laugh again. But then suddenly someone started clapping. Then another. And another. The applause grew louder, spreading across the room like a wave. It was not polite or forced. It was real, filled with shock and emotion. People stood up from their chairs, clapping harder, cheering. Some even whistled. The sound was overwhelming. Lena slowly looked up, her eyes wide. The billionaire stood too, his expression unreadable. For a moment he just stared at her, then gave a small nod and joined the applause. Lena didn't know what to do. She smiled awkwardly, stood from the piano bench and gave a small bow. Her hands were still shaking. The pianist who had been playing before came forward, looking stunned but smiling warmly. He whispered something like, "That was beautiful," before gently taking her hand and guiding her off the stage. As she walked back toward the service area, people turned their heads to watch her, whispering in amazement. She felt her chest tighten with emotion. She had not just played a song, she had shared her soul. For a few minutes she had been free again. Not a waitress, not someone struggling, but an artist. She wanted to cry, but instead she took a deep breath and smiled quietly to herself. Meanwhile, the guests kept talking about her performance. Many were shocked that someone working as a server could play with such passion and skill. A few guests even asked the hotel manager who she was, wondering if she had performed professionally before. The billionaire sat silently for a long moment, still processing what he had just witnessed. His amusement from earlier had turned into quiet admiration, though his pride made it hard to admit. In a far corner, one of the guests, a well-known music producer, was still staring at the piano, clearly deep in thought. He leaned toward another guest and whispered, "Did you record that?" The guest nodded, showing the video he had captured on his phone. The producer smiled slightly, realizing he might have just witnessed something extraordinary. Back in the staff area, Lena leaned against the wall, her chest still rising and falling from the rush of emotion. Her friend from the staff approached her, eyes wide. "I didn't know you could play like that," she said softly. "You made everyone cry." Lena laughed nervously, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I didn't mean to," she said. "I just wanted to play." Her manager, who had been watching from the corner, came up to her too. He was an older man who rarely showed emotion, but now his eyes were soft. "You made us proud," he said quietly. That was something else. She thanked him politely, unsure what else to say. When Lena returned to the hall to clear some tables, people smiled at her. Some even clapped again when they saw her. It was strange and overwhelming. Guests who had ignored her before now looked at her with admiration. One woman took her hand and said, "You reminded me what real beauty sounds like." Lena thanked her with a shy smile and continued working. Though inside her heart was racing, Mr. Harrington, the billionaire, finally approached her near the end of the evening. He was holding a glass of wine but didn't seem as proud as before. "You surprised me," he said slowly. "I didn't expect that." His voice was quieter now, more respectful. "You played beautifully." Lena smiled politely and replied, "Thank you, sir." She didn't say anything more. He nodded and walked away, but something in his expression had changed. Later that night, when the guests were gone and the tables were empty, Lena sat again near the piano. The lights were dim and the hall was quiet. She touched the keys softly, pressing one or two just to hear their sound again. It felt like saying goodbye to a friend she had finally found again after years. She didn't know if anyone would ever let her play in public again, but that night she didn't care. What mattered was that she had played and people had listened. Her heart was full. She looked up at the ceiling, tears filling her eyes again, but this time they were happy tears. For the first time in a long while, she felt proud of herself. She realized that maybe dreams never really die. They just wait for the right moment to return. As she locked up her apron and prepared to go home, one of the staff members handed her a napkin with something written on it. It was a note from one of the guests. It said, "Never stop playing. The world needs people like you." Lena folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket. She smiled to herself as she stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered around her, and the sound of distant music floated from somewhere down the street. She walked home quietly, her steps light, and her heart at peace. What had begun as a moment of humiliation had turned into one of the most powerful experiences of her life. She didn't know what would happen next, but deep down she felt that something had changed. Maybe it was not just her music that had come back. It was her hope. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the moment in her mind. The laughter, the silence, the applause. It all felt like a dream. She smiled to herself in the dark. "Maybe this is just the beginning," she whispered. And somewhere inside her, she knew she was right. The next morning felt unreal. Lena woke up with the sound of music still echoing in her mind. For a moment, she lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering if everything that had happened last night was just a dream. But then she saw the note still folded neatly on her nightstand. The one that said, "Never stop playing. The world needs people like you." It brought a soft smile to her face. She held it gently, remembering every detail of that night. The laughter, the fear, and the applause that followed. It all came back to her in flashes, like pieces of a movie she couldn't believe she had been part of. When she reached the hotel that day, things felt different. The other waiters and staff looked at her in a new way. They greeted her with smiles instead of the usual quick nods. One of them said, "You went viral," and showed her a phone screen. Her heart skipped a beat. Someone had recorded her performance at the party and posted it online. The video had thousands of views already, and the comments were filled with people praising her. Words like amazing, heartfelt, real talent scrolled across the screen. Lena covered her mouth, not sure whether to laugh or cry. Her manager came out of his office and smiled proudly. "I told you," he said softly. "That was something special." She nodded, still in disbelief. For years she had served others quietly, never once imagining that the world would see her for who she really was. Now suddenly people were noticing her, not for the tray she carried but for the music she played. As the day went on, guests came up to her, asking if she was the girl from the piano video. Some wanted to take pictures with her. Others just wanted to shake her hand. One guest even asked if she gave lessons. Lena was overwhelmed but grateful. She kept smiling and thanking everyone politely. Deep inside, though, she still felt uncertain. She didn't know where all this would lead or how long it would last. In the evening, when things were quieter, Mr. Harrington came to the restaurant again. His usual confident stride was still there, but his expression had changed. He looked thoughtful, almost humble. When he saw Lena, he called her over. "You've become quite the star," he said with a small smile. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply said, "I didn't expect any of this, sir." He nodded slowly, then paused. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I was unfair. What I did was disrespectful, but you turned that moment into something extraordinary. You taught me a lesson I won't forget." Lena was surprised. She never thought someone like him would apologize. "Thank you," she said softly. "I didn't take it personally. Maybe it was meant to happen that way." He nodded again, clearly moved by her grace. Before leaving, he added, "If there's anything I can do to help your music career, consider it done." She thanked him again, unsure if he meant it, but his words stayed with her long after he walked away. Later that night, as she was cleaning the tables, a man approached her quietly. He was one of the guests from the previous night, the one who had been sitting near the front listening closely. "You probably don't remember me," he said, "but I was there when you played." She smiled politely and said, "I remember you, sir. Thank you for listening." He nodded and handed her a card. "I'm a music producer," he said. "I'd like to talk to you about recording something. You have a rare gift. People need to hear more of it." Lena froze for a moment, staring at the card in disbelief. It felt too good to be true. "Are you serious?" she asked quietly. He smiled. "Completely. Call me when you're ready. No pressure." Then he left, leaving her standing there with the card clutched in her hand. That night she walked home with her heart racing. She couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in years, she felt like her life was opening up again. She showed the card to her mother when she got home, and her mother's eyes filled with tears. "I told you," she said softly, holding Lena's hands. "Your music was never gone. It was just waiting for the right moment." They both sat together for a long time, talking about her father, about how proud he would have been to see her play again. Days passed, and the video kept spreading online. News outlets started reaching out, wanting to interview her. The hotel management even asked if she would perform officially during special events. She was nervous, but she agreed. The next time she sat at the piano, it was not because someone mocked her. It was because she was invited to. The guests watched her with admiration, not laughter. Each time she played, her confidence grew a little more. The producer she had met came to see her again. They sat in the quiet corner of the restaurant after hours, talking about music and her story. He listened carefully, taking notes. "People love stories like yours," he said. "Not because they're dramatic, but because they're real. You play with emotion. That's something that can't be taught." He suggested recording a few songs for an online release. She hesitated at first, but with her family's encouragement, she agreed. A few weeks later, she found herself in a small recording studio. It was simple but professional, with warm lights and soft soundproof walls. When she sat in front of the piano there, she felt that same nervous energy as the night of the party. But this time it was different. This time she was there because she belonged. The producer stood behind the glass window, giving her a thumbs up. She smiled and began to play. The recording session went beautifully. Her hands moved gracefully and the music flowed effortlessly. When it ended, everyone in the room was quiet for a moment before the producer finally said, "That's perfect." She felt tears prick her eyes again. She had never imagined that her music would be recorded professionally. When her first recording was uploaded online, It spread quickly. People who had seen her viral video shared it again, calling her the pianist who touched the world. She began receiving messages from strangers around the globe, people thanking her for reminding them that it's never too late to follow your dreams. Some said her music helped them through sadness. Others said it inspired them to start something they had given up on. Lena read every message with a full heart, humbled by how her simple love for the piano could touch so many. One day, the hotel organized a charity event again, and Mr. Harrington personally asked her to perform. "This time," he said, smiling kindly, "you'll be our guest artist, not the waitress." Lena was touched. The same man who once embarrassed her was now giving her the honor of being the star of the evening. The night of the event, she arrived early, wearing a beautiful yet simple dress. She sat at the same grand piano that had once made her so nervous. But now it felt like an old friend. As she began to play, she noticed familiar faces in the crowd, her mother, her co-workers, the producer, and even the billionaire watching proudly. The melody she chose was one she had written herself, a piece about hope, forgiveness, and second chances. The audience listened in silence, their faces soft with emotion. Every note seemed to carry the story of her journey, from the quiet waitress to the woman who found her voice again. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood up, cheering and clapping. Some even shouted her name. Mr. Harrington came on stage, shaking her hand with respect and gratitude. He whispered, "You've changed more than just your own life tonight." After the performance, reporters asked her questions, but she answered simply and humbly. "I just played from my heart," she said. "Music is something I love, and I think love always finds a way back to us." That night, when she returned home, she sat by the window with a cup of tea, thinking about everything that had happened. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She knew she had found her path again, and she was ready to follow it. As the city lights flickered outside, she whispered to herself, "It's not about fame or money. It's about sharing something honest." And with that thought, she smiled. She picked up her small notebook and started writing a new song, one that told the story of how a challenge meant to embarrass her turned into a moment that changed everything. Days later, when she returned to work, people still talked about her. Some guests came just to see her play. Her co-workers treated her like family. Even the hotel's management added her story to their promotional brochures, proud to say that one of their own had become a symbol of inspiration. Every time she sat down at that piano, she remembered where she started. The weight of the tray, the sting of humiliation, the fear of being laughed at, none of it mattered anymore. It had all led her here to this place of peace, where her heart and her music could finally breathe again. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its own quiet way. She had found her purpose not by chasing success, but by being true to herself. And as her story spread farther and farther, she became not just a musician, but a reminder that sometimes, even the most painful moments are the ones that lead us back to who we really are. The weeks that followed were like a dream for Lena. Her music had reached people she had never met. Every day, new messages came from all over the world. Some were from students who wanted to learn music. Some from older people who said her story gave them courage to try again. Every message made her smile, sometimes even cry quietly. She never thought her small moment of courage that night would go this far. It felt like a miracle, one born out of a simple act of honesty and heart. At the hotel, she still worked sometimes, but her duties had changed. She was no longer serving food at tables. The manager had asked her to be the hotel's resident pianist. She now played in the evenings when guests arrived, filling the lobby with gentle, soothing music. People often stopped to listen, some filming her, others just closing their eyes and enjoying the calmness her music brought. The same place that once made her feel invisible had now become the stage that helped her rise again. She stayed humble through it all. She never acted like a celebrity or forgot her past. When people told her she was lucky, she smiled softly and said, "It wasn't luck. It was life giving me another chance." Her co-workers respected her even more now. They remembered the quiet waitress who once stood in fear before the piano, and the same woman who now played with confidence and grace. They would sometimes joke gently, saying, "When you become famous, don't forget us." She would laugh and reply, "You'll always be my family." One morning, while she was practicing in the empty hall, the hotel's event director came in with a big smile. "You've been invited to play at the city's annual music festival," he said. "They want you to close the night with your performance." Lena's hands froze over the keys. She couldn't believe it. The festival was a big event, attended by famous artists and thousands of people. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said. "They watched your video. They said they want the girl who made the world stop for a song." Lena didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It felt unbelievable that someone who once played secretly in her small apartment was now being asked to perform in front of thousands. For the next few weeks, she prepared carefully. She wanted to play something special, something that would tell her story without using words. She spent late nights practicing, rewriting melodies and thinking about her journey. Every note she composed carried a part of her soul, her struggles, her father's memory, the laughter that once hurt her, and the kindness that came after. The night of the festival arrived. The stage was set outdoors under a canopy of lights. The air was cool and a soft breeze moved through the crowd. Musicians performed one after another, filling the evening with rhythm and joy. Lena waited backstage, her heart beating fast. She looked around and saw so many people smiling, clapping, living in the moment. For a second she felt small again, like that girl who once stood frozen in a grand ballroom. But then she remembered why she was here, not to prove anything but to share her heart. When her name was announced, the crowd clapped warmly. She walked to the piano set in the middle of the stage. The lights felt bright but comforting. She sat down slowly, took a deep breath, and looked out at the sea of faces before her. It was quiet. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then she began to play. The melody started soft, almost like a whisper, just as it had the night she played for the Billionaire's party. The first few notes were gentle, pure, and full of feeling. People in the crowd leaned forward, drawn in by the calm beauty of the sound. Then the music grew richer, more emotional. Her hands moved like water, smooth and free. The piece she played told a story of losing hope and finding it again. It spoke of pain, kindness, and second chances. It carried light inside every note. The crowd listened in complete silence. Some held their phones up to record, others simply watched, their eyes shining. As the melody built up, a wave of emotion spread through the audience. The sound of the piano echoed into the night, mixing with the cool wind and the soft glow of the lights. There was something magical about it. It didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a conversation between one heart and thousands of others. When she reached the final part of the piece, Lena closed her eyes. The notes slowed, turning softer and softer until the last chord lingered in the air like a breath that didn't want to end. Then came silence, deep, peaceful silence, and then suddenly the crowd erupted into applause. People stood up, clapping, cheering, some shouting her name. The sound washed over her like a wave of warmth and love. She smiled, tears filling her eyes, and gave a small bow. It was not just applause she heard. It was acceptance. It was belief. After the performance, she was invited to speak on stage. The host handed her the microphone. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was calm. "Thank you," she began softly. "I don't have big words or fancy speeches. I just want to say that this piano saved me. It reminded me who I am. Music has been my way of healing and finding hope again. I hope my story tells you one thing, that it's never too late to begin again." The crowd clapped again, some even wiping tears from their eyes. After the event, many people came to meet her. Some were young musicians asking for advice, others were fans wanting to thank her. The producer who first discovered her was there too, smiling proudly. Even Mr. Harrington had come, standing quietly at the back of the crowd. When everyone started leaving, he approached her slowly. "You've come a long way," he said with a kind smile. "I'm glad I was there that night. It taught me more about humility than any business deal ever could." She smiled gently. "Maybe everything happens for a reason," she said. He nodded. "Yes," he agreed. "And you showed all of us that sometimes the best things happen when we least expect them." He handed her an envelope before leaving. Inside, she later found a note and a check. The note said, "For your next album. From someone who believes in second chances." She smiled and placed it carefully inside her bag. Months later, Lena released her first collection of piano recordings. It was called The Light Returns. The title came from a phrase her father used to tell her when things got difficult. The light always returns no matter how dark it gets. The album became popular, not just because of her talent, but because of her story. People felt her sincerity in every piece. She didn't chase fame. It came naturally, drawn by the honesty in her music. Even as her life became busier with interviews, small concerts, and travel, she stayed grounded. She still lived in the same apartment, still visited the hotel often, and sometimes played there just for old time's sake. Whenever she walked past the table where she once stood shaking with embarrassment, she smiled. It was a reminder of how far she had come and how life could change in ways you never plan. She often spoke at schools and community centers, telling her story to students who dreamed of becoming artists. "Don't let fear or pride stop you," she would say. "People may laugh, they may not believe in you, but that doesn't matter. You just need to believe in yourself." She always said it gently, not as advice, but as something she had learned through her own journey. One evening, as she sat by the window at home, the city lights glowing outside, she played softly to herself. Her mother listened from the other room, smiling. The melody she played was new, something calm and full of peace. She thought about her father again, about how proud he would have been to see her now. She whispered quietly, "I made it, Dad." The years went by and Lena's name became known in music circles. She never stopped playing. Every new song she wrote carried the same heart that had once filled that hotel ballroom, the heart of someone who had lost everything but still chose to keep dreaming. Her music became a comfort for people going through hard times, and she always made sure her performances stayed honest, simple, and full of warmth. Even after success, she never forgot that her journey began because of one moment of humiliation. She often said in interviews, "Sometimes life tests us in strange ways. But those moments are not meant to destroy us. They're meant to remind us what we are truly made of." And people listened because they could feel that she meant every word. On the anniversary of that first performance, the hotel invited her back once again. This time, not as a performer or a staff member, but as an honored guest. The hall was decorated beautifully, and a grand piano stood in the same spot as before. When she sat there once more, she smiled, remembering how nervous she had been that night. The manager gave a short speech, telling everyone how her story had inspired not just guests, but everyone who worked there. When it was her turn to speak, Lena simply said, "This place gave me my second chance. I'll always be grateful." Then she played again, filling the room with the same beautiful sound that once changed everything. As the last note faded and the applause began, she looked around at the faces smiling back at her. She realized that her journey had not just been about music. It had been about kindness, courage, and never giving up. She had touched lives not through fame or wealth, but through honesty and heart. When the evening ended, she stepped outside into the cool night air, the same way she had years ago. The city was quiet, the stars faint but shining. She took a deep breath, feeling peaceful. She knew that no matter what the future brought, she had already achieved something timeless. She had turned pain into beauty, doubt into strength, and silence into song. And somewhere deep inside, she felt her father's presence, gentle and proud, whispering once again, "The light always returns." Lena smiled and whispered back, "Yes, it does." Then she walked away slowly, the sound of her footsteps blending with the quiet hum of the city, her heart light, her spirit free, and her music still echoing softly in the night.